Welcome to F1 or F Off, your audio pit stop for F1 news and race reviews. I'm your host, Iddris.
And I'm Gabe.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Episode 2. We're calling this the
Season
22 Review Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't intend that necessarily, but you know what? That's going to be the name of the episode. Yeah.
It works.
I was just like my note, but I'm like, yeah, no, that's perfect. Season 2022 Review Electric Boogaloo.
It sticks.
Yeah.
It sticks.
Happy New Year's, everybody.
2023.
2023. Iddris, how was your New Year's? What did you get up to?
It was great. It was really, really good. You know, we ended up just spending a lot of time with family and doing some chores, cleaning up. I mean, I know that doesn't sound super fun, but like it was nice and cathartic to do.
Boring. You're such a
you know how
boring
sometimes
person.
you just gotta Marie Kondo your life sometimes. You know what I mean? Like it helped. It helped
Well, you know, for some people, cleaning actually sparks joy, so that makes sense. I get it.
And I would say a lot of joy was sparked.
Okay. All right.
How about you, Gabe?
Well, don't set your house on fire. Mine was fun. You know, here's the thing. I haven't gone out too much. I don't usually go out to too many parties, you know, and with everything going on with COVID and, you know, the fact that I'm in, you know, Portland out here. And so downtown Portland, where all the bars are, a lot of places had like a cover charge and like you needed to get tickets ahead of time. And also like any major city, parking sucks. So a lot of that sort of just made me feel like, I don't know if I want to go out tonight. I decided, you know, I'm gonna have a chill night inside. I got myself some edibles and I decided to watch Top Gun Maverick, or should I say Top Gun 2. Tom Cruise is totally not old enough to do that, or totally not old, and he can totally do this, and you guys are wrong. Like that should have been the alternate, because it's just a vanity project for Tom Cruise the whole time. I was laughing, and then what made it even better was my housemate told me, and it's not really a spoiler, but the first thing you see is he's a test pilot for an airplane, and you know he runs into some trouble, and it kind of a crash ending. And my housemate said, yeah, if you look at that movie as in the rest of the movie is just a fever dream as Tom Cruise is crashing to the ground from the first plane flight, then it makes sense. And it's totally true. The whole movie feels like a fever dream. It was amazing. But
okay,
yeah, had some ice cream and just had a good relaxing New Year.
So, I like that.
Yeah,
I do wonder sometimes about these films. Like, it's much better if you imagine them as a dream sequence, because everything that just ensues after the first 5 minutes, you're like, there's no way.
It was fun, but the problem is it's like 80s movies being fun were fun because even when wacky stuff happened, you had like a, you know, Kenny Loggins tune going in the background and everything was bright and magical. But then with these, it's like they try and have all these weird over the top things happen, but then it's also just so dramatic.
Right.
Like, you know, the great thing about the first Top Gun is that its dramatic moments were very specifically chosen. But with this one, it's like every moment is some sort of like trauma related thing happening. And I'm like, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, I just want to see jets. Show me more jets.
Yeah.
So anyway, on the subject of today's episode, we are going to talk about the season 2022. So this previous year's season of Formula One, just as a little kind of brief overview of sort of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the cars. We're going to talk about the teams and the drivers. We're going to talk about the tracks a little bit. And then we're going to talk about certain moments, and particularly kind of special sort of moment, which we alluded to in our first episode of being in Austin. And so the first thing we want on the list I want to talk about is the cars.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't know, this season had a big regulation change.
Big.
Which, Iddris, if you want to kind of tell people, of those who might not know sort of why that's a big deal, sort of how that comes around.
Yeah, so Formula One, I think one of the best ways to start by describing it is defined by eras, right? Whether that's eras of dominance, eras of drivers, eras of, you know, technical regulations. And this big regulation change that came for the 2022 season, they've been talking about this for several years now, right? So I think the last era was the turbo hybrid era, where all the cars went to V6 engines, hybrid V6 engines, right? Making that engine, I think, the most efficient engine in the world, technically. I think it's something like 51%.
I looked this up. Yeah, it's like 53% thermal efficiency, which is the highest of any engine ever.
Yeah,
like,
which is insane.
It's insane. It's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm going to nerd out for a quick second. So
nerd it.
Thermal efficiency is measured by the output of a given device over the input, right? So your output is going to be less than your input. And the fact that they were able to get 54% out of that is just insane. So really cool. Um,
it's sort of like how recently they talked about they had that new nuclear fusion where it like outputted more energy than it inputted, and that
right.
was like a big moment.
That's
It's
huge.
sort of like that. It's like it's impressive that a vehicle is capable of burning fuel and
Yeah.
essentially doing it with such efficiency that it almost makes burning that fuel sort of a lesser cost, which is all part of Formula One's effort to be a
Yep.
net zero carbon emissions by like what 2030, I think, right?
2030 they're pushing for, yeah. But yeah, this last era of the turbo hybrid era that ended 2021, and with that season end, then came in all these new cars that look a little different than cars we've seen in the past. Well, at
Oh,
least in the
big
past 10
difference.
years, yeah.
Oh, big
Um,
difference.
so
Yeah.
this era is marked by the use and utilization, heavy utilization of the teams, something called ground effect, right? And that is
Mhm.
where you are literally sucking the car down to the ground via the suction force, right? You've essentially created a venturi underneath the car, which just sucks it down in the car. That
Yeah.
increases the amount of downforce. That is the force that pushes down on the car when you're driving, right?
Mhm.
Pushing it
Well,
down,
in this case,
adding,
it's not like it's like from the ground because it's ground effect, like underneath the car, right? It's more or
oh,
less that
yeah,
sucking,
yeah,
but
that's
it
right.
adds to the overall concept of yes,
Exactly.
downforce, which is the air kind of pushing down on a car as it goes over.
Yep, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the intent was to increase the closeness and proximity of the cars to one another when they're racing, right? Because one of the big complaints over the last era of racing during that turbo hybrid era where Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes just cleaned up, until Max was able to get his hand on the trophy and yank it back for Red Bull, was that the racing sucked, right? As far as how close cars could get to one another, right? Like you
Right.
would see it time and time again where person's out in first place and second place, they can't follow that closely for too long because they're going to put way too much heat into their tires and their brakes, and they're just going
Yeah,
to
well,
destroy
and
their front
that's
end.
caused by the turbulent that was caused by kind of the turbulent air from the previous cars. So
Mm-hmm.
just as a quick backtrack, I just want to like clarify a couple of things too. One thing I wanted to mention also for folks is that so the reason why the sport is called Formula One is because if you think of it like Mario Kart has 50cc, 100cc, and 150cc, right?
Yeah.
So the FIA as a governing body has different race series that are like open wheeled racing. They have F3, F2, F1, and they have a few other sort of supporting races under their wing too. But what the formula literally means that it means that there is a specific formula or set of regulations and rules that these cars have to abide by. Everything from the width of the car, the weight of the car, the power output, all sorts of different things they have to sort of conform to. And that had started out in the 60s when actually the 50s when they jumped back into the sport. The sport started up again post World War II. And so this formula or these regulations change over time. And there have been so many different changes. So what
Mm-hmm.
Iddris was talking about, what you referenced, was that in 2014, they went from naturally aspirated, which means it's just a V8 engine without a turbo or a supercharger attached to it to give it more
And just
power.
using air to cool the car, right?
Right.
And to draw
Right.
air into the car, yeah.
To these new vehicles which had less cylinders. They were V6 instead of V8. But in order to make a sort of compensate for the loss of power, but also give more efficiency, they reintroduced turbochargers, which hadn't existed in Formula One since the 1980s. And
Mm-hmm.
on that subject as well, the ground effect that we talked about with these new cars was also a carryover from the 80s because it was
Yeah.
banned originally when it came out. It was the secret thing that nobody really thought of that Lotus pioneered. And they had actually, in order to keep air from escaping underneath the car, they had these skirts that would literally scrape along the ground of the track. And
Mm-hmm.
those were called skirt cars they did in the 80s. And eventually they banned that because the cars were getting way too fast and it was
Like
getting way too dangerous.
yeah, yeah.
So this year they did this big regulation change to, as we were saying, specifically to focus on more passing so that like
Mm-hmm.
Max could try and catch Lewis by making the airflow over the car coming out the back a lot more streamlined so that the
Yeah.
cars behind could utilize that air to effectively to make their components on their cars be more effective, which wasn't happening before, because when the air would escape the cars before, behind them, it would spread out all over the place, and it was what they call dirty air, and so the cars would
or
literally
just
not be
turbulent.
able to make a turn, or turbulent.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to actually make the turns, and their performance dropped like just a brick. It was
Oh,
really
just
bad, and
tanked.
so
Just
nobody
tanked.
could
Yeah.
pass anybody, and it was just like watching a train going around the track. It was
Yeah.
not fun. But the good
Would you
news is,
would you say it was an electric boogaloo of cars
it
around the
was,
track?
yes, yes, it was kind of like a lot of races were just like that going on. But good news is season 2022 had a
Yeah.
30% increase in passing, which if
Yeah.
you watch the races,
That's
like,
significant.
that's significant. You get more excited. The commentators have more things to shout about,
Yeah.
and it makes the racing more competitive, but it also makes it more entertaining for the fans.
And what's so cool too? Well, cool. It's kind of funny. It's ironic, right? Actually, I don't know. Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? Is it the fact that
Is that okay?
that's what I was going for,
I can't hit that
but
note, so
we're no longer tenor
I
boys.
ain't trying. No,
Yeah, but it's really funny because 2021 that was the last year of the turbo hybrid era, was one of the most competitive seasons
Well,
in a
technically, it's
super
still
long
turbo
time.
hybrid era, right? What
Well,
are they calling
of that
this?
specific, I guess the Mercedes era, like if
Yeah,
real talk, if we want to call it
yeah.
that.
Well, yeah. They won
The,
7 constructors
no, eight,
championships. Oh,
eight.
eight. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
not
Yeah,
one,
8.
not two, not three, eight.
Yeah, and
They won.
Hamilton won 7 of those.
Yeah,
That's the
and
impressive thing.
right.
Yeah.
And so the final season of the Mercedes dominance era, where there were complaints about a lack of competitiveness and actual on-track racing and overtaking, was one of the most competitive and most intense seasons of all time that resulted in a nail biter at Abu Dhabi.
Oh yeah.
The results we'll
Ooh.
probably we'll get into at a later point in
Maybe,
this podcast.
yeah. I would say in the meantime, if anybody's curious that hasn't seen it, just go back, and I'm sure there's tons of clips
just watch
on
it. Just watch
it's
it.
it's kind of hard without context, but it's still dramatic. You feel the energy from the commentators, and I think that kind of picks it up. But
yeah, and what's wild is just that most competitive season in recent F1 history, and then the next season we completely change up the regulations. And I mean, to be fair, the racing has been really good this season. Yeah, there's been a lot of overtakes. I think we have jotted down in our notes here that Hamilton had 56 passes, Fernando Alonso 54,
our boys
52. Yeah, 1 and 2, baby.
Yeah, Zhou Guan Yu. I do want to say that was the surprise. Zhou Guan Yu is the driver for Alfa Romeo, which is they weren't the most competitive team. I think I don't remember how the standings officially came out. They were not in the top 3 or even top 4, I don't think, in constructors.
Yeah.
But in Zhou Guan Yu, was this his first season?
This was his first season.
And he got
came out
52
swinging.
passes in the season. That is impressive. Just like Hamilton is a 7-time world championship holder. Alonso has won 3 championships, right? No,
Alonso's 2.
Yeah, 2. And Alonso is notorious. Well, I won't say notorious, but he is known for being a very efficient passer. Like he's usually right up there every season. And so to be kind of up there amongst those two, that's impressive. So really a shout out to him for that.
Round of applause for Zhou Guan Yu. Like,
give it claps. Give it claps.
Yeah. I actually think I want to say I think there was one person who actually had a higher number of passes in this last season.
Yeah. Max was in between them. Max was number 3. I just didn't include him because it's Max.
I mean, he already won. Whatever. You're gonna get shout outs anyway. So I think we can say with the 2022 season, as far as its racing competitiveness, seemed really good. Yeah, I think we had a number of race winners. Charles winning a few races. My boy Carlos Sainz coming in with this first. Yeah, we'll get there, but I'm so excited.
I know, yeah. Well, let's get in. Let's start getting. So now we talked about the cars. Let's talk about the teams.
Let's do it.
So the main teams, and I'll just give people a quick list. So you have Red Bull, which is obviously an energy drink that sponsors a very successful Formula One team. You have Ferrari, who have been in the sport for pretty much the entirety of its official runnings. You have Mercedes, which is a factory works team for Mercedes that has had some incredible constructors success. McLaren, which is another team that Bruce McLaren started throughout the 50s and 60s before he tragically passed away, but his team kept on and has had a incredibly high win percentage for a race team. Definitely a legacy team for the sport.
Absolutely.
Aston Martin has just recently got into the game. They took over what was
Racing Point,
Racing Point,
which
which before
was
was
Force India.
Force India. Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of team changes. Alfa Romeo, which I think we talked a little bit about, is also Sauber. They're going to be switching to Audi in 2026, right?
26, I
26, yeah.
believe. Yeah.
Alpine, which is a French bespoke car manufacturer, they had some rally success in the 70s. Williams, which is a kind of another sort of legacy team from the 70s, a guy named Frank Williams basically just built it from this ground up and made it an incredibly successful team throughout the 80s and the 90s.
Also, real quick, it must be said that he was conducting business for Williams out of a phone booth across the street from his warehouse. Like, what?
Yeah, when we say built from the ground up, yeah, we literally mean he didn't have an official telephone. He would call people from a payphone and then sit and wait to get calls back. Like he knew what he built it from his hands up. And then we have Haas, which is the Formula One American team that Gene Haas owns. He's been involved in motorsport for quite a while, a lot of NASCAR racing and such, but definitely has had some controversial things in its past, which we will talk about at some point. So that's a little rundown of the teams. So Red Bull won the constructors, which, I mean, congratulations to them. But what Iddris, what do you think generally was the reason for that success? And we can mention, we can mention that they were a little naughty and they violated some rules.
Is this ASMR Red Bull chat now?
This is ASMR Red Bull chat. So they spent too much money. They spent more money than they should have on the 2021 season. FIA found out and they punished them. Do you think that had a substantial effect on the car? Like, just from your opinion.
Maybe let's take a step back from that and explain what happened. Red Bull went over their cost, and the cost cap, I think, was what, 140 million, something like that. Is that correct?
It's funny. These numbers are so big, it's hard to remember them.
Yeah. Red Bull went over the cost cap somewhere around 3 or 4%.
It was less than 5. I watched it. It was less than 5.
Less than 5%.
Yeah, okay. Because it was a minor cost cap infraction, and that came with a list of possible punishments. So everything from exclusion of points for particular races or constructors championships, exclusion from, I mean, the championship altogether, or the one that's most relevant here, and that is a reduction in wind tunnel time. Do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason this is significant is because F1 teams, their development, you can't just build a car and just go drive it on the track every single time that you have a new version of the car, right? That doesn't make any sense. We live in an era of computers, right? And really cool simulation softwares that can calculate and analyze all this stuff for us without having to do that. So what we do, we take our on paper design of the car, mock it up in something called CAD, computer aided design, or some kind of 3D modeling software in your computer, right? You take that, you run it in your CFD software. CFD is computational fluid dynamics. You get all these numbers that tell you how the car will respond and perform in certain scenarios. If you like it enough, you take that version of the car, then you build a miniature model of it, right? This could be some scale version, whether it's a 1-to-1, which is 100% like real scale of the model, or scale it down, whatever floats your boat. You then put it in something called a wind tunnel, where you pass wind or air over it at a certain velocity.
Wind or air.
Yeah, wind or air.
Sometimes both. I mean, maybe one or the other.
What is the difference between wind and air? Is wind just moving air, I guess?
Yeah, I guess. I never really thought about it. I mean, I would say wind is that seems right. Wind is air that is moving. I mean, because air can be, I mean, it floats and it sort of, this is Iddris and Gabe's scientific and like sort of concept descriptions day. I would say that's accurate. But anyway.
Because real quick, the thing about that is that the Captain Planet intro would be much less cool. would not be as cool if you heard air, water, like, wait, is that how Earth?
No, wind,
air,
heart,
like that doesn't sound cool. Heart already sounds like, I don't know about that one.
Brain.
I want fire, guys. Yeah.
Liver.
Anyways, okay, so you put the vehicle in the wind tunnel, and then you get confirmation if the phenomena that you observed on your CFD software, your simulation software, actually exist. in physics and in real life, right?
Right.
And so the wind tunnel is extremely important. It's such a crucial element to understanding whether or not your car will actually function, right?
Right.
And for Red Bull to lose time in the wind tunnel is significant, right? Because any modifications or adjustments or updates that they want to make to the RB19, that's next year's car, right? The RB19.
Yeah. Well, assumingly it's the 19. I mean,
Yeah,
who knows?
assuming
Maybe
it's
they'll
RB,
change
unless they
it,
change. Yeah.
yeah.
That's gonna hurt them, right? So they lost 10% of wind tunnel time. They went from
Roughly,
70% to about 63%, so roughly 10%.
Yeah.
And I think it's baseline to 100%. So I'm assuming it's one of the mid-tier teams who.
So the way that breaks down is that each team, as they get lower in the standings for their constructors, they gain more time in the wind tunnel to help compensate for their lower performance. The number one team who wins gets 70%, and then it moves down in 5% moves up in 5% increments as it goes down the field.
Right.
Red Bull, as partial their punishment for spending too much money on their car development, they got that 10% roughly sort of a reduction. So they were down to 63%. And then Ferrari, who was next in line for the constructors, they were 2. They have 75% time spent. And it breaks down to a certain amount of hours and certain amount of components that they can test in the aero tunnel. Now, here's the thing, that this is what's interesting. So you say that it's a big Achilles heel for them.
It could hurt, yeah.
Now, I heard something interesting, and this to me makes sense. I'm curious to what you think. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Ferrari specifically mentioned, the other teams, obviously, they don't think that the punishment was strong enough. And the Red Bull, of course, is going to cry wolf and say that it was horrible. But they were suggesting that because Red Bull did not have aerodynamic disadvantage or did not have like a bad prototype this season, that they really didn't need to be spending too much on aerodynamics anyway, because the regulations are not changing significantly into next year.
Right.
And so because this was effectively a test session, Mercedes was essentially like, hey, look, they've got plenty of time to sort of figure this out. They don't need that extra time. So it really was not a punishment that's going to affect them all that much, because they also, their cost cap hasn't been reduced. And that was another thing. Like they did not lose money to develop for the next year's car. So they could spend all that extra money that they would be spending on aerodynamic development to other things to make it even faster. So I'm really curious to see what happens. I don't really think it's going to make a huge difference, because I think Red Bull I think as a team, they are intelligent and experienced enough to be able to figure this out.
And they are firing on all cylinders right now.
On all
right?
engines.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them. all of like 6 engines that they're allowed to have in the cars throughout a season before they get penalties. Well, the next thing I want to talk about, Iddris, and this is where the Netflix Drive to Survive season is going to get real weird. In Monaco, which is something I want to talk about.
Dude, that's going to be a whole episode.
Well, we can definitely, we'll touch on it, but basically in Monaco, they had this whole drama that happened, and we can, if you want, we can talk about, we'll just talk about this now. The principles when you're in a team, there's like a saying that goes around in Formula One, and that is the first rival you need to beat on track is your teammate. And so because of that, a lot of people are kind of iffy with sort of on-track orders, and like sometimes like drivers will be told to give up a position to their teammate for like because of the constructors championship, or maybe they're faster or whatever. And sometimes teammates butt heads, and they don't like that, which is understandable. So basically, I mean, I'm of the belief that especially early in the season, you got to let the teammates race and 100%. See how things shake out. But if things happen later in the season that change that, maybe you bring in some team orders, especially if it's, would help you in the long run. So in Monaco, which is a legendary race, during the final qualifying session, which qualifying is set up into 3 tiers, and then it's sort of like an elimination round. So each round eliminates a certain amount of drivers, and then the third session is the top 10. So Sergio Perez, who is the second driver for Red Bull, the first being Max Verstappen, who was this year's champion, he supposedly, according to Max, basically sabotaged his lap in order to make sure that he disrupted the other guys' races, including his teammate Max. So in Monaco, the walls are really narrow, and so there's not any runoff area. So if your car crashes, or if you go off track or something, or if you hit something, chances are it's going to stop the session and or bring out a race, a safety car, which parades the cars around the track. And there has been multiple instances throughout history of this sort of thing happening. Michael Schumacher in Ferrari was accused of throwing his lap so that he would stay P1. He would stay in the pole position and nobody could beat him.
Allegedly, though, right?
Nico Rosberg, same thing. He allegedly ran afoul in a Monaco qualifying lap in order to prevent Hamilton from putting in another hot lap to potentially unseat him for the top on the grid. So apparently Sergio Perez was accused of doing the same thing, specifically by Max. But this is where it gets a little weird. So the telemetry, which is basically the digital readouts of throttle position, how, if they're braking, where they're turning, like what position the steering wheel is, the data showed that on this specific turn, it was turn 8 before they entered this big tunnel section, that he basically hit the gas and that caused his rear end to spin and then he hit the wall. The data sort of shows that there was a spike, which is unusual because these guys are the most consistent drivers. They have to be. It's their job. So they don't, they make mistake is one thing, but like every lap is almost a complete mirror of itself with maybe just a little bit different, a little bit increase.
And to quickly add in here too,
go for it.
That is typically an area where you do not hit the gas.
No, yeah, it was a very heavy braking zone because it's a very sharp corner. Now, Max and Perez were not positions 1 and 2 at this point. Ferrari had the first 2 top speed slots. So Perez was in 3rd place at the time, and Max was in 4th as far as their race time goes for the qualifying session. And so the FIA could not verify the intent from Perez because it definitely wouldn't really make any sense if he was. Usually when that happens is because you want to have 1st place, but because it was fighting for 3rd place, it was a little awkward. It just didn't seem to make too much sense. So there's a lot of sort of mystery about it. But the consequence of that was that several races later, well after Max had already clinched the title, well after Red Bull had already clinched the constructors, Sergio Perez was battling his Ferrari counterpart, Carlos Sainz, for was it second? It was 2nd place, right? Yeah.
No, it was for 2nd place in the constructors championship.
In the
drivers championship.
Drivers championship. And Max was, I think, comfortably, they weren't in the top position, so Max wasn't running first. I forget exactly what position they were at, but if Max would have let Sergio Perez pass him by in this race in Brazil, Sergio would have clinched the number 2 spot on the drivers championship, so it would have been Red Bull 1 and 2. Max refused to do this, even though the team gave him orders to do so. And his reasoning was alluded to because of this drama with Monaco, which seems incredibly, to me at least, it feels very petty and unnecessary. Yeah. I mean, if you have issues, if there's speculation, you deal with it internally. And at that point, he didn't have anything to lose. He had already won the championship. Like I said, the constructors had already won their championship. Red Bull was already on top. There was no reason for them to do that. And for him not to do that. And he didn't, because it felt really petty to me.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there. I think what's really unfortunate about the scenario is that it didn't just stay on track though, right? It didn't just stay within the team and stay between the drivers. Like it spilled onto the social media where, and like, I don't know.
She made some post on Instagram or something, or social media that was like trying to slander Perez, which just felt really,
it's just uncomfortable for all parties involved, you know?
It was not great.
And so, I don't know. I hope the two, whatever happened, whatever this is based off of, hopefully they can patch up and get back to being the dynamic duo of a team that they've been. Because I think, honestly, that's been the reason that Red Bull has found so much success is because of the camaraderie between Checo and Max, you know? And if that gets disrupted, I mean, I would say arguably, right? I mean, I would say that's probably one of their, imagine if Max had a teammate who couldn't really work the car well, right? Who couldn't put the car in positions that it needed to be in order to get the team maximum points, you know? Because it's not just about the drivers' championship. Red Bull, I think to them, that's kind of icing on the cake, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Like the real allure for them is to win that constructors championship, right? To say we have the best car on the grid for this year, right?
Well, and I think that Perez has been the best. I think technically Perez has been the best teammate that Max has had, but apparently Max at times forgets that because he will pull stunts like these, which just feel really, really unfair. I mean, had Sergio not held off Lewis Hamilton in that finale race of the previous season, Max
Mhm.
may not have gotten the chance to actually win. It would not have been that close. So there was you can make that argument that Perez did everything that he did and it could.
Mhm.
And you could say it was an error, maybe just the nerves got to him. Who knows? But anyway, I would say with Red Bull and that whole drama, at this point, it's just kind of done and gone, moved on.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
And the reason I say hopefully is because honestly, like real talk, if that was done on purpose, there's some serious questions then that need to be asked, right? About first like the ethics of that, right? Like there's kind of there's like a sportsmanship, conduct, and ethical question there, right? If that is true. Not saying it's true, hopefully it's not. And I'm sure the FAA, if they're gonna investigate it, they're gonna investigate it and like put the report out, or maybe they won't. I don't know. But that raises some serious questions if that is true. And I would hope that that's not the case.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens next year. I mean, if they're both competitive, I don't think Sergio is going to pull as many punches as he did.
Yeah,
which is honestly good for him.
He come out swinging, bro. Like,
come on, he's got to win some races.
Yeah.
He's trying to be a championship. He's not going to bend the knee to Max every year. Yeah. I mean, that'd be terrible. So if Nico Rosberg had done that to Hamilton, he wouldn't have won a championship. But
that's true.
They brought some great racing. So. Next thing I want to say, at least with the teams that we could sort of wrap up, Red Bull pretty much had the biggest news. Firrari was such a weird enigma this year.
Mamma mia,
I mean, right. The first couple races were really strong, but like Carlos spun out quite a few times, and like Leclerc had some mechanical failures back and forth. They started so strong, and everybody thought they were going to be like the ones to beat. But I'll tell you what, they started teetering out really early. And then you started getting these weird radio strategy calls that really threw some wrenches in. There's one famous one that everybody memes now where the race engineer was talking to Charles Leclerc, and he's just like, "You want to come in for tires question?" And like, it's just like,
it's like, bro, what?
You're asking him? Like
you tell me, you have the data, bro.
Right. Yeah. It's like, you got the data. I'm just driving, Obviously, the driver has some say because he's in the car. He can tell you if the tires are going bad. But at the same time, they had some weird radio calls, some strange last-second choices that the drivers didn't agree with. And I think the thing that bothered me the most was how much the drivers were sort of being muzzled with expressing frustration. And this is really interesting with Ferrari because, like I had alluded to in that first episode, they are a very strange company and very strange team in the sport specifically.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to talk bad about Ferrari. The fans don't like it. The press don't like it. They will grill you. Famously, Alain Prost in the 90s, when he switched from McLaren to Ferrari, he described the Ferrari at one point as driving like a truck. And what he meant by that was that they had power steering issues. And so it was really heavy. And he said that's how he described it. But Ferrari took that the worst way possible, and they literally just canned it. They're just like, you cannot say that about Ferrari. Like,
you're calling me a truck?
Right. It's like, even if it's a completely terrible car and it's super slow, nobody is allowed to talk bad about it unless it's like, we're from Cleveland. And so when we hear people criticize Cleveland and Ohio, it kind of feels like a personal attack.
Oh, yeah.
But then we do it all the time. Like, I'm always talking about how annoyingly weird and awful Cleveland can be, but like if anybody else talks about it, I'm like, no,
they can't. No, they can't. You can't talk trash about Cleveland.
You can't talk. Not Seatown. Not the land. No, you can't do it. Hey everybody, Gabe here. Just a quick editing note. We decided to cut this into 2 parts. We ran a little bit long, so look forward to part 2 of our 2022 F1 season review. This has been F1 or F off. Thanks. Take care. Hey everyone, Gabe here. Welcome back to F1 or F off. This is the part 2 to our 2022 F1 season review. Enjoy.
All right, Mercedes is up to bat. So I think first off, we got to talk about their incredible mechanical reliability. I think they only had 1 retirement.
Yeah, which is nuts.
The entire season?
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Formula One cars are so highly strung. They're so Everything
was
is down to
drunk.
like literally, like quite literally
Yeah.
laser precision in
Yeah.
order to get these things to go. I mean, in the worst excesses of the spending in this sport, there were teams that would use qualifying engines, which means that they were engines that were only good for maybe 5 laps, and then they would literally explode if they went any further,
Yeah.
because they extracted every single bit, and these cars have to go like 70, like 60, 70, 80 laps,
Yeah.
depending on the track and the length. So they got to last a race distance, and in some
Yeah.
cases, multiple races.
And I
And
think
so I think the only other motorsport I can think of that goes through engines as much, or is as, technically sort of unreliable in a sense that Formula One is maybe drag racing for sure,
mhm.
monster trucks, and like those giant tractors that where they like bolt 3 engines onto the front and just
Yeah.
pull stuff through the
And just
dirt.
haul
Like
it.
those things
Yeah.
explode all the time. So
Yep.
so the fact that Mercedes managed to have a almost in it, like basically it was throughout the entire season until literally the last race,
Yeah.
and Hamilton had a mechanical failure.
They
They went through basically that whole season without having a mechanical failure. There was a couple
yeah.
of DNFs where I think it was race incidents. It's
Mhm.
different when somebody hits you, or if you make a mistake and crash, and if the car literally fails.
Yeah.
And so having
I
that reliability, it was hugely impressive.
yeah. Agreed, 100%. I
Something
also
that they're
think
known for,
it's
though, right?
yeah, yeah, big time, big time, especially in the last era. Mercedes engines were just they just keep
Chef's
going.
kiss.
I guess they are the Honda, the
They're the
Toyota,
Duracell battery of
yeah,
a Mercedes,
or honestly, I was
just
going to say the Toyota Corolla or Camry engine of F1. They just keep going, right? Like
yeah.
you can sink that bad boy in the swamp of the Everglades, pull it up years later, starts right up.
Yeah, no,
Um,
people, you think of speed, you think of power, you think of efficiency, but a lot of people forget about how important reliability is to a race car.
yeah, yeah,
Because hey, man, your engine blows up, you can't win the
yeah.
race.
And
Sorry.
the funny thing is when you couple speed and power, it typically does not equal reliability, right? So
No, yeah,
hats
right,
off
right.
to them for doing this, right? Like
Yeah.
just the parameters that they're running it under, it's just insane. But one thing I wanted to mention about Mercedes too that's really funny is that Mercedes, I think Toto Wolff, he like last season during the 2021 season actually mentioned that Mercedes was pivoting their time and energy and honestly all their effort towards the 2022 car, right? For this new era.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that a team such as Mercedes, who on record has stated that they really started pushing their development time towards a new car
Mhm.
early on last year,
Yeah.
has honestly they ended up third in the construction championship, right? Which is good, right? They
Incredible considering their performance. Yeah.
incredible considering their performance, right? The best of the rest, I guess, because there was a little bit of a gap between them and Ferrari. But on the flip side, you have Red Bull. They really didn't start development on their car like super early in the season of last year, from my understanding. I actually just listened to the Beyond the Grid podcast episode with Christian Horner, and he mentioned that. He said, yeah, we had a lot of energy and time poured into the car for 2021 and making sure we were getting out as much performance as possible to take up with Mercedes.
Right.
And it worked, right? But then
Right.
they immediately pivoted towards 2022 car. And I'm sure they had like early designs and prototypes and simulations and
Well,
stuff kind of
yeah.
showcasing what they could do for this year, but they were not putting the same amount of effort, same level of effort, at least as we're being made to believe on the outside, hearing from interviews and stuff that Mercedes had or some of these other teams. So hats off to them to have such a stellar 2021 season, pivot, have a stellar 2022 season. But then Mercedes, on the other hand, things didn't really work out too much.
Well, that's one thing people forget too, is that Formula One, when they reveal the car, when they have the unveiling for the practice sessions early, before the season starts, with some limited moments or limited bits, that car is pretty much the prototype and it's done.
Yeah.
People back in the factory will start to work on the next season's car, especially once the regulations are announced. And so some teams will do a thing where instead of developing, if the potential for the performance of the car that year is really high, they will develop that car and they'll keep working on it. And a lot of those parts will just translate to the next car for the next season.
Yeah.
But some teams, they kind of play this strategy game where if they know their season is compromised and they're not really doing that much better, they will just focus all of their development, spend all whatever money they have left on making that next car to they sort of give up on the season. They're like, well, look, this car's not going to get any faster. Let's work on next car to make sure we get a leg up.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of risk and reward, and it's a lot of gambling. So that's why the whole thing with the aero tunnel is interesting, because it's like how much of that development that they did and all the data that they got from this year is going to translate to next year's car with the reduced time. Who knows?
Another interesting fact too is that I think I read an interview with Adrian Newey. He's the technical design lead over at Red Bull, and I believe
Legendary
he said that legend, like that dude's the GOAT. If we're talking about championship winning cars, the Red Bull cars, he's won like championships with. He goes back into the 90s. He was at Williams. He was at McLaren. Like,
he has spearheaded a lot had really amazing Formula One car designs that have been hugely successful. He is a really good designer.
But yeah, he had mentioned that he thought Mercedes design was really interesting, and that was one of the options they had considered, but they actually went the opposite direction with what they ended up going with the RB18, because just like from their simulations and from their design meetings, they were just like, this is the concept to go with. So seeing Mercedes go with the zero side pod concept was really interesting. It kind of looks like a blobfish, right?
A little bit, yeah. If I would encourage people to look up pictures of it and compare them to the ones. So that when he says side pods, what he means is next to the driver, there's a big air intakes where the air comes into the engine. Typically they're kind of bulge outside next to the driver, and you have this big opening, and the air kind of forms around it. Mercedes did this weird thing where they sort of reduced the area footprint of it. Yeah. And it kind of looked like a giant walked up to the car and just took his hand and just kind of shoved it in, kind of like a really cheap car door that you just go pop. It kind of looked like that. It does give some blobfish vibes out of it. But yeah, that was because I think Mercedes had mentioned, I think Toto Wolff had said that early on they realized the concept of their car, like certain major things that they couldn't change were what they were. And so that was kind of compromising a lot of their performance through the season. But the good thing is they know what mistakes that they made. And so they're kind of made these changes for next year. So next year's car should be quite a bit more competitive.
More stable. Well, fingers crossed.
Stable, competitive, fingers crossed. Yeah.
And so one last thing I wanted to say about the Mercedes car. I'm just like really excited about it.
You love Mercedes.
The porpoising on that car though, bro. Oh my God.
We should have said this in the car section, but explain porpoising, Iddris.
So porpoising, okay. So I mentioned previously about like what that ground effect is, where it helps to suck the car down, you get more downforce. One result or effect of that, you can get so low to the ground where you effectively stall the flow underneath, and then the car bounces back up. Then the whole suction back to the floor, that whole process begins again, right? So there's a frequency to it. So you're going up and down, up and down, up and down. So you can imagine going at the speeds that these drivers are racing these cars at, like
70, 180, 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, getting like 210 miles per hour, right? You're going to be feeling it if you're in the driver's seat. So the Mercedes car was notorious for just the level of porpoising, and that's that effect of going up and down, up and down, up and down. That's what they've dubbed it.
It's like a dolphin porpoising through the ocean,
or a porpoise porpoising through the ocean.
Yeah, that's right, a porpoise. Nah.
Yeah, what about that? We don't say dolphin.
I didn't, I didn't pay attention in class when we were talking about porpoises.
Like, just to end it on Mercedes though, there was one race in particular where Lewis got out of the car and just my man's back was looking pretty wrecked, and I felt terrible.
Yeah, well, it's a physical concern, but that was just, it's one of the weird quirks of doing regulation changes that people forget about and they need to anticipate. But I want to take this time now to talk a little bit about the tracks. We got a couple of tracks in this season that we hadn't seen before. Some were like, there were some that kind of came back, but then some that were new that was like, I don't know about this one. Miami. But one track I want to talk about specifically, because it's a point of contention whenever people talk about tracks in Formula One specifically, is Monaco. Just as a little background for people who might not know, Monaco is basically F1's equivalent to like the Daytona 500. It's one of those things where it's like, if you watch Star Wars and Star Wars doesn't have any reference to the Force, like it wouldn't really feel like a Star Wars movie, right? You know what I mean?
Do you mean midi-chlorians?
McLaurin. So, yeah, I mean, you know what I'm saying. It's like Batman. If you don't have the Batmobile at any point in a Batman like movie or like show, it just doesn't feel complete. It feels like there's
I feel
something that's
that.
missing. Monaco is
Mm.
that for Formula One. It is a hugely prestigious race. The argument is that, oh, well, that's not a reason to keep it around if it's, it's a street circuit, and so it's really the walls are really close. Like I had mentioned previously, if you crash, it's guaranteed to bring out a safety car or stop the race
Oh,
because there's
definitely. Most definitely.
no room to get around everything. But despite all of its sort of faults, there's a couple of things about Monaco that I think are very, very important, especially for the viewing experience. One is that it is one of the best ways on television to really capture the feel of speed that
Oh
these cars are
yeah.
going. There are several camera shots that are just it's so insane to watch them, and they look like those little electric cars going around that like the tracks, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they used to
It-
hold with like
it's
a little wire attached to it.
it's just, how are these
Yeah.
things staying on the road? There's some of the most spectacular visuals representations of speed that the sport has to offer. It happens at Monaco.
What specific
um
part of the track would you say is your favorite as far
oh
as seeing that, getting that sense of speed? Because I have my
oh
favorite, and I'm wondering if it's the same as yours.
it's the chicane at the pool. There's a shot where it's a straight line that you see them entering, and they make a left turn and then a quick, or they make a right turn and then a quick dart left, and the
Hmm.
camera is positioned right like like a straight line from the through the apexes of that turns,
Hmm.
and they just go boom boom, like just dart, and it's incredible to see like 4 or 5 cars just fly through there at speed. They always show it every year. It is like chef's kiss. It's just so perfect of a
Hmm.
visual representation of the speed. It's amazing. They also at that point have these
That's a good one.
really intense slow-mo footage where they'll zoom in on the tire as it approaches the guardrail,
Oh
and
yeah. Oh
there
yeah.
there are
Millimeters.
instances where if they don't touch it, they will, like, you couldn't shove a piece of paper in that gap, and they're hitting it well over 100 miles an hour. It's
Yeah.
insane. I
Spooky.
absolutely love it. What's your favorite part of that
Oh
track?
man, the one that gets me every single time we race at Monaco. What am I saying? We for like I'm there. Like
Oh, I raced.
anytime
I've done that.
I'm there in spirit.
I mean, Gran
Um,
Turismo 4, I raced it all the time.
Oh, there we go. There we go. I would say that the tunnel for me,
Oh, Tunnel's
when they
great.
just
Yeah.
hit that tunnel entrance and then they're just going, right? That you see the sparks flying because the bars board
Oh
shape.
yeah, yeah. There's the
And
midpoint. Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of like a long. It's not a straight per se, right? I mean,
There's a curve. Yeah.
there's a curve to it, but then they exit the tunnel and then suddenly blinding sun in their face, and then they have to like slam on the brakes, turn left, turn right, turn right, turn left, right,
Mm-hmm.
to get around through that little box there, right?
Yeah.
And it's just that gives you a real sense of speed because you see like the acceleration, hit top speed,
Mm-hmm.
sudden deceleration, and then just to go into a really crazy
Yeah,
turn. So
the
I
three
love that.
places that show that perfectly are the hill after the first turn heading up the hill. There's a camera that looks straight down that hill that gives you a great sense of speed. There's the one I mentioned through that chicane, and then yeah, there's the camera in the tunnel that it's like a stagnant camera, so it doesn't move. It
Yep.
just gets left and right side, and so you just get thrown. They just fly, and the sparks flying. Monaco is, it just feels, it's just it is the crowning jewel of the sport. Like I
Mm.
think that the sport would be missing a huge portion of itself if we did not go to Monaco.
It's kind of like if Ferrari weren't in sport, honestly.
Kind
Like
of, yeah.
Ferrari and
It's
Monaco
just
are like the apple pie and baseball bat of America. You
yeah.
know what I mean?
The steak and eagle flying over the canyon in Colorado, blasting Boston. Yeah, it just feels right. But Monaco, like we said, has some issues. The cars are really big and wide, so driving through Monaco is kind of a pain. And I would say that there's ways to get around that. The best one that I actually heard was from Chain Bear. He suggested that do a Joker lap. Now, if you don't know what a Joker lap is, I'm going to tell you. In rally racing and rallycross, when they go around a little kind of dirt track and they're all doing this thing, they have what's called a Joker lap, which is basically a section of the track that's slightly longer than the normal portion of the track, or is that reversed? I forget. It's one or the other. There's a portion of the track that's a shorter run, and then there's a portion that goes longer. It like goes around, and every car is required to do that at least once in like a given race session, because what it does is it sort of mixes the field up a little bit, and it also gives the drivers sort of opportunities to like sort of spread out their sort of performance of the lap time, like how they kind of get through. And so there's a great suggestion of with Formula One of making a Joker lap in Monaco, where they sort of extend the street circuit in a certain area that kind of dumps back off on a certain portion of the track. I would say the only dangerous part that you would really ever encounter with that is the entrance from the Joker lap back onto the
normal track, right?
Which is, so long as if it was a straightaway, it would be a lot easier to anticipate. You know, if it was a blind corner, that could be tough. Yeah. So there's definitely issues and things to be worked out. But I think that if they could figure out a way to do that, I think that would really liven up Monaco in a really good way and make things interesting. Because a lot of times what happens is that the drivers, once they do qualifying and then they're in the grid position, there's not a lot of passing happenings on Monaco because there's just not enough room. You know, if you have a Joker lap, you could mix up the grid a little bit, and I think that could be good. But
I mean, the only other way to really make a massive shakeup to how Monaco functions is making the car smaller, right? But that's not going to happen because of the current regulations. And I mean, I don't know if there's a strong desire for the FIA to go that direction.
No, I think it would be too expensive. If they did like a Monaco spec car, that would be too expensive.
Oh yeah. But I mean, not even doing a Monaco spec car, it would have to be. I mean, do it for every single track, right? Like, that is just the spec of the car now. But
well, and that's the thing. I think these cars fit the bigger tracks better, and there's more of them. So it makes sense to go with the bigger car that's going to work better on a bigger track. You know what I mean? These are
some honking cars, man. Like they are
they're big. Yeah, they're very big. I mean, we saw them in person and they were bigger than I thought they were going to be.
They were thick.
That was they are. Couple, just like two things I think I kind of want to talk about. The first one, though, while we're kind of getting close to wrapping this up, is so Max wins the championship in a very controversial, sort of anticlimactic way. Do you want to kind of say how that kind of went down, Iddris, in your own words?
It was so uncomfortable to watch. I'm like, what is going on? Like, he's out there. Who was it? What's the guy's name? Johnny Herbert or something? Like, I can't remember. But whoever was doing all the drivers interviews for the podium, drivers at Suzuka, he's like, Max, how do you feel about being champion? And then Max is just kind of like, what are you talking about? Because he had won the race, right? And then he's like, well, Max Verstappen, you're a champion. And then Max is like, okay. And then runs over to his team and like jumps into the pile. And then they like hastily put up like Max Verstappen 2022 world champion. Like,
so what happened was in Japan, basically it came down to mathematically there was a few different ways that the race could shake out. Max had a chance to clinch the title, but it requires him to be in a specific position for points value, and it also dictated that other people had to be in certain positions in order to not pose a challenge to his win, which was like Charles Leclerc.
I think Charles. You say Charles or Charles? I say Charles.
I go back and forth, but I think it's Charles Leclerc. At least that's how I say it. But the Japan was an incredibly rained out race. So there's a lot of not running that happened. And basically the way that it ended was because there was so big of a rain delay, they modified the points values that were given out for whoever was in the race, because they didn't go the full race distance that's required and they didn't match the time. So Max was in first place. So he won the race. But there was a discrepancy based on how everybody else, all the other points were going to work out and whether or not a certain points were going to be reduced. And so essentially Max goes into, there's a little staging area for the people who are going in the top three, and they have towels and water and they're talking to each other, and it's a cool down room. Yeah. While they wait to go out and do the champagne spray. And somebody, I think it was Jensen Button, was there, and I think somebody was there, congratulated Max on winning the championship, because there was suddenly a determination that he had won enough points. Typically when a driver wins the championship on track, they like celebrate, they cry, they do donuts, like it's this big emotional moment because it's this huge event. Max was caught so blindsided and he wasn't even sure that it happened, and the most awkward thing happens. They usher him into a room next to the cool down room that has a red chair that literally looks like it's from
Oh,
Wayfair. A
I think it
white
is from
blank,
Wayfair.
yeah,
I think it is.
right, and just like a white blanket, and then there's the wall is just a giant TV screen that is like
His
clips
highlight
of like
reel.
his highlight reel of like his
Oh,
season. It looks like it would be like a display at like Best Buy or something, and he's just sitting there really awkwardly in this chair with nobody around him, and like the thing's
wait,
going, and then he gets up and he walks back in the cool room and he's just like, oh, it's kind of lonely in there. It's like it was this huge
it was
cringe
weird.
moment.
It was weird. And like the
I was
cameras
like,
followed him in there.
ah. I was
And
so hoping that they were going to reverse that decision and let him win on the track again and just get
I
that moment,
mean,
but nah.
but that's the thing though. Like real talk, like this kind of touches upon last year's season finale race in Abu Dhabi. If something happens and it's controversial, like even if it's not the way that things typically have gone, you can't just undo it just to redo it so the expected outcome happens, right? Like it's tainted, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't feel the same for any and everyone. This is not me saying that Max should have won last year or anything like that. No, just saying that it was a weird situation in which he won, and it's a weird situation that he won here, right? And it
Yeah.
sucks because he's been deprived of like a non-controversial
Yeah.
non-controversial
2021
championship
ended
win.
controversially, which I would say if you don't know, I would look it up. It's the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix 2021 finale. There was a weird decision made by the race director that kind of went against sort of precedent set for certain
Right.
rules regarding safety cars, and it was a big controversy, but at least he won out on track and he made that pass. This
Right.
one was just sort of like, oh yeah, there was barely a race that happened, but it just so happens you got enough points, so
Yeah.
there you go.
And honestly, that's what it comes down to sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Like winning is not necessarily about like these crazy events all the time. It's about
maybe,
look,
yeah,
I did it on paper and
maybe that's
you
why
know.
Max is so salty all the time.
You think he's salty all the
You
time?
know, because he had to sit on a Wayfair chair. Um,
Like, this is
you
not
know,
good quality.
yeah, it's like, it's like if there's a sports team won in a tie and then everybody went home and then they told them, well, no, technically we missed a basket and this team won and you're just sitting at home.
Ugh,
It just
yeah.
doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say in conclusion for the 2022 season, basically the big highlights that we got going on is Max wins awkwardly. Red Bull gets penalized for exceeding the spending limit, even though they did win the constructors. Ferrari started strong and then just fell into a tailspin in perfect Ferrari fashion, and
Yeah.
everybody feels really bad for Charles Leclerc.
Mhm,
Which, to be fair, like that guy tries hard, he's playing the game, but
mhm.
it kind of goes down. Hopefully next season we will get just as much passing, if not more. Hopefully, controversies will be a little more interesting and a little more gray area than just weirdness. But
Oh,
one thing I
we
wanted to say to cap off our 2022 season is that we mentioned this in our first episode. You and I went to Austin,
yeah.
and it was my first and your first F1 race experience,
Yes.
right? Yeah, we
Indeed it
experienced that
was.
together. What is, if you could put that experience into a okay, I'm not going to give you a word because I feel like that's rude. If you could put that experience into
Wait.
like,
How would that be rude?
because it was too amazing. I can't just say it was awesome. That just doesn't seem like it encapsulates it well
Mhm.
enough. Give me a sentence if you're to
Okay.
describe it in a sentence.
I would say that it felt like Max Verstappen winning the championship in Suzuka had he won it under full points and got to sit in that velvet Wayfair chair, but like with excitement. You know what I mean?
They should just
Like
pull that out. They
the
should
chair
pull
was
that
kind of
out
cool.
to the podium when they're spraying champagne and have him sit in it.
They should. They
That
should.
would be that's the decision.
Yeah. But no, and in all honesty, it was an experience that I'll never forget. And I hope to attend many more Grand Prix in my life.
Yeah,
So
hopefully, me too.
hopefully I get to experience that feeling again. But it was just so cool, right? To be
But
around
not
people.
but not Miami and not Vegas. Let's pass that.
You
Canada,
know,
maybe we're coming
I
for you.
think Canada would be dope.
That
Canada's
would be
really
dope.
cool. But yeah, it was just a really cool experience. And just to be around people who love the sport as much
Mm.
as I do and as you do, it was really cool. Just
Mm-hmm.
had conversations, just chopping it up with people, waiting in line for food that
Yeah.
was
The
expensive. But hey, the food was good. Food was
the
good though.
constant polka music that was happening in the
Oh
background
yeah.
throughout like most of it
Yeah.
until the race started.
So yeah,
Um,
for race day, we sat near turn one. So we
is
saw
the
the smoke.
Bavarian tent, I think, that was behind us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So where we sat, we saw the smoke from when Carlos spun out after
George,
getting
yeah,
tagged
George
by
ran
George
into
Russell.
Carlos at turn
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Oh, also congrats George Russell on his first win for the season. Speaking
Oh
of,
yeah, yeah. He won
um,
Brazil. It was an amazing race. Brazil is definitely, I think, my favorite track
that is the track.
in the season.
100%.
It's just so good.
It's so
Great racing.
why aren't there more Imolas?
Or Imola and Interlagos. Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
I
Oh
those
my
two
God.
of those two tracks are definitely among my
Yeah.
favorites. 100%.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mixed up Imola and Interlagos. What I meant was
It's okay. They
Interlagos.
both
But
begin
yeah,
with
it's true.
I's. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
for
yeah.
Idris, Imola, Interlagos,
That's right.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no,
100%.
honestly, it was a great experience, and I really want to do it again. And
Hmm.
it was just cool to be around my people. What
Yeah,
about you?
agreed. I would say best weekend,
Ever?
easily top three weekends of my life.
Ooh, what are the other
Yeah.
two? Wait, yeah, where does this
Um,
rank? Is this number one?
I would say probably, yeah.
Ooh.
I would say the other weekends I can think of, one of them was actually motorsport related. It's when we went to Mid Ohio, the
Oh
IndyCar
yeah,
race.
that
That
was
was
dope.
really amazing. Being in
That
Thunder
was.
Valley was fun as hell.
Yeah.
And then the third one is honestly, it's I would say probably my trip from Ohio to Portland when I moved across country.
Okay.
I don't know if
Okay.
it was on a weekend, but it was 3 days or 3 or 4 days. And I was like, spent the time with my brother Ben. He gave me a bunch of really insane would you rathers that I absolutely love repeating because they're incredible. Maybe we'll talk about them at some point when we feel like it on here. But yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest thing for me was meeting just the sort of energy in the air of like everybody felt like they were at least acquaintances
Mhm.
automatically, like
Yeah.
because we were all there to enjoy this one thing that we all had a shared passion for. We got a chance to meet two amazing motorsport journalists, Elizabeth Blackstock and Lance King. They have a book that they wrote, Racing with Rich Energy. If you feel inclined to get it, I recommend it. It's incredible.
It is great.
And meeting them was definitely one of the big highlights because it's just instantly just super down to earth, enjoyable, wonderful people. And I think that was the energy, I think, is the big thing I took from it. Just like
Yeah.
feeling everybody's joy or despair depending on what the drivers were doing on track at
Yeah.
the
Who you
given
support?
moment.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I definitely a repeatable thing. I would definitely go back to Austin too because it sort of
100%.
has that like warp tour sort of feel to it where you just kind of go
Mm.
around to different areas. It's like each corner is almost like a different stage,
Yeah.
and you kind of go to and you just post up with your chair. We definitely need to make sure we got umbrellas to go though next
Yeah.
time. So,
Yep. Yep.
but yeah, highly recommend it. 10 out of 10 would go again. So
Yep.
I was, yeah, it was wonderful. So
I like that. I like that.
okay, well, we talked quite a lot. This definitely went a little longer than I think we should, but it's kind of hard once you get talking about something like this that you really really love. It's just
Yeah. It just keeps
it's
spilling.
yeah, it's just like it's hard to just not keep rambling. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, is there
And
anything
that's what we
else
do.
you want? It's what we do.
What we do, baby.
This is it. Is there anything else you want to touch up on? Any kind of points you want to talk about with the
Uh
2022 season before we put it in the proverbial storage box in our brain and move on to the next season?
just like shout out to all the other teams that we didn't mention. Like I think there were some
Mm,
really, really good battles and lots of good development
yeah.
with the drivers and the teams this season. From McLaren, Aston Martin, Williams, Alfa Romeo, Alpine, Haas. I mean, those are the rest of the teams.
Yeah.
I think every team, it was a really good season. It was really fun to watch. And I wanted to give a shout out to all the drivers who left the grid this year. I mean, Danny Rick leaving McLaren, leaving the sport, but actually coming
Mhm.
back, right? As reserve driver for Red Bull, which I think is
Yeah,
going to be a
he's
good
back at
fit
Red
for him.
Bull.
Yeah.
At some point we could, well, I mean, there's so many things we could talk about,
Oh,
but
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, Daniel Ricciardo, great driver, great guy. He had a lot of good success in Red Bull. And then, to be fair, he tried to make a career change and,
Yeah.
because he wanted to switch it up and, didn't exactly go his way, but he's got the one thing I really value in a lot of drivers nowadays is likability. He's
Yeah.
down to earth. He's easy to get along with. And that
Yeah.
goes in any professional career, that goes a long way being
Yeah. And
somebody that people want to be around and work with.
And Mick Schumacher Schumacher is in the exact same boat where he was leaving the sport and he's back on the grid as as a reserve driver for Mercedes, and that just feels right, like a Schumacher with Mercedes,
Right. Well, and also like Mercedes, I think is going to treat him better than Haas did. They seem to like him better, and Mick Schumacher is such a likable guy. He thanks every person in like the pit as soon, like when he's done. Like some drivers will just be pissed and they'll just go to the back. He like goes around, shakes everybody's hand, and he tells them like, good effort, good job, guys. Like he's just naturally a likable, good-natured dude, and you want to see people like that succeed.
Of course,
And maybe that's why like I'm maybe not the biggest Max fan, because like Max sort of has this arrogance that sure that works if you're like a hotshot driver, but like I don't know, I kind of like the nice guy, I like the dude that's like doing his best but is also really talented.
Max has that like assassin attitude to him, you know what I mean? Like
a little bit.
He'll just show up to the to the job site, get the business done, go home.
Yeah, well, he does a lot of he does a lot of business with that team. He grabs that Red Bull by the horns.
Is the B and
then he complains
the
that the horns
business
don't feel right, and then he gets really mad that it blames the team because the horns aren't on right.
And the other two drivers who were leaving the grid, there was Nicholas Latifi. Nicholas Latifi leaving Williams, and
Vettel. I definitely want to deep dive into at some point because he's a guy worth talking about. So thanks everybody for listening. We really, really appreciate you being here with us. We love talking about this, and as you can tell, we have a lot of opinions, so much in our brain about this sport, and it will continue to unravel onto this podcast as we continue, and that will only happen so long as we have support from people who are willing to listen to us and like what we say. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, and we're looking forward to making more episodes. So all right, everybody, well, have a good new year. Happy 2023.
Let's go.
Let's go.
And keep up on those New Year's resolutions, right? All of us.
It's okay if you can't get your New Year's resolutions done.
It's all
fine.
good.
Just the effort is what counts.
Yeah.